Good evening and welcome to this conversation with DaEun and myself. Tonight, as part of the dance concert series with Loyola Marymount University's dance program, we will be talking about the construction of the Baekwi Minjok, or people of the white clothes in Korean culture, and actually how this work and this research has influenced not only the creative work that I've done with DaEun, but also how we have collaborated to create work together based on this research, as well as DaEun's own research in folk traditions and folk dance. So my name is Leon Wiebers. I am an associate professor of costume design at Loyola Marymount University, a Fulbright scholar to South Korea. And I'd like to introduce Jung DaEun, our guest choreographer and who holds an MFA from UCLA. Welcome, DaEun. It's been such a pleasure to work with you and to collaborate with you, and I'm really excited about this conversation.
I am too. Thank you for inviting me in this Baekwi Minjok lecture and demo session. And thank you for inviting me to LMU that I was able to work with amazing students in LMU dance department and Leon and other faculty members. To give some introduction of myself, I am an LA-based choreographer making contemporary dances in a contemporary context, but my body and my work just reveal the roots of my culture and the traditional dance training that I had in Korea. I started dancing when I was 12. I went to the dance studio that taught ballet as the basic and modern dance, plus Korean dance. In Korean dance educational system, so you should do those three things, like categorized into Korean dance and ballet and modern dance. It applies to the college entrance audition. So I worked hard to do all of those things. And the dance instructor in my studio told me that if you want to be the best dance performer in the world, but if you're good at Korean dance, so you can be the best dancer in the world since you're from Korea. So I chose that pathway. So I went to the National Music and Dance Middle and High School. It's called 국립국악 중고등학교. I was trained pretty systematically there with 3 categories of stage dances for 6 years. And I went to Ewha Women's University. So as I know of that university is the first university that established a dance department in Korea. So I graduated from there and had an experience as a professional performer, dancer in Gyeonggi Provincial Dance Company that I was mastering all those Korean dance repertoire and contemporary style of Korean dance, creative Korean dance, plus modern and contemporary dances there. And after I relocated myself here in LA, I went to UCLA, amazing program in choreography, MFA program. So I studied more about my own investigation about making dance, still having my cultural roots and using the forms and sources and context and philosophies of a traditional Korean dance in my contemporary work, still mixed with all those other elements in contemporary life. So yeah, that's me. And thank you again for inviting me in this exciting.
So excited to have this conversation. And we're both alums of UCLA, so there you go.
UCLA and LMU.
I know, exactly. Okay, so let's just dive in. This is going to be given the state of COVID, this is going to be a very casual conversation about our research and our work together, which has been such a joyous collaboration. So, okay, so let's start out. For those in the audience who are new to Korean culture, The basic garments of Korean dress or traditional dress called hanbok are the choguri, the paji, and the chima. Now, the choguri is worn by both men and women, as well are paji, but oftentimes paji are underneath the chima of the woman, so you don't see them. I was awarded a Fulbright to South Korea in 2012 and 13 to do research in traditional dress and performance. And so my work there really began to look at these very foundational garments and then how they represent themselves on stage or in film and television. And so this has led me to using these ideas and collaborating with these ideas to create new contemporary works of art. And so with that, DaEun, how does hanbok, work within the folk life and performing arts?
Yeah, so with it, yeah, I would like to point out that the forms and functions of Korean ancestors' folk life and their daily clothes, hanbok, and music dance interplayed closely. For example, just we saw those long sleeves and long skirts, those all generated their daily gestures, rolling up sleeves or folding up their skirts. It's almost their daily ritual before they get to work in the rice field and their house in the farm. Then it's revealed in folk dance with those movements passed on to us. And there's one more note that music, dance, and play in their lives had no barriers among each other. They sang and danced as they worked to energize themselves under the hot sun in the rice field. And as they had religious rituals or community rituals in hanbok as their costumes in mostly a community setting.
And so now we'll share this short video, which is DaEun. DaEun, can you explain this?
Yes, this is the part that I have been working with the students. And these are all the gestural moves that I am investigating to contemporize with my body, but still functional, that I am wearing the long skirt and long sleeves. And I'm trying to do this in different manners and tempos and different styles to incorporate this idea through my contemporary body. That now you see that combing my hair, folding up, adjusting my skirt, and offering with your palms. Many things are relevant to the long skirt, manipulating it, and with your heel, pointing out the traditional shape of the sock. And also
really
there are
like
some
how you
rolling.
manipulate the skirt, that beautiful gesture. One of the first things I realized when I lived in Korea was the simple hand gesture of manipulating the chima.
Yes, there are so many delicate, precise ways to manipulate your skirt. To do that, you need to articulate your 10 fingers. And also all body coordination to help with that. With the students, we were investigating how to embody that gestural moves coming from Korean folk dance, but still in your contemporary body. So what I tried in that costumes that DaEun designed, so we're gonna talk about it later, beautiful white hanbok. In there, so with those long sleeves, with that long skirt, how can you manipulate them or functionally do the actions, and also having some characteristic emotional evocation from yourself. So those are the investigations that I had with the students.
Excellent, thank you. So we want to talk a little bit about Dure. So after my first year in Korea, I received funding from USITT to go back and research Dure, which is essentially farming rituals and farming traditions. I was very interested in the dress of the common person because so often in dress history, the garments of wealthy people and nobility are the first researched and the first preserved. So I wanted to learn more about the average person in the agrarian history of Korea. Um, and so I went and traveled throughout the country, researching these ideas and thinking about them. And one of my first places that I went was the Agricultural Museum in Seoul, which had these amazing dioramas, which are pictured here, but are pictured here of the people working in the rice fields, singing and dancing, or in the village center, singing and speaking and working together and doing things. And that's really sort of at the heart of Dure, is this
Mhm.
communal work in order to achieve the harvest, achieve the planting, in which everybody had a job. And when their job was done, they would go and help other people. It was
Mhm.
very important for the community to support each other in order for the community to survive. So here we have
Mhm.
in these depictions of the agricultural museum, you know, people
Mhm.
performing and all in white clothes as well. So then here we have this wonderful detail of a pansori performance. DaEun, can
Mhm.
you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, this is the portion of the big painting from back then. That this is the particular area which is called Pyongyang, the capital city at that time. Um, so this is happening in the middle of the city. That now you see these pansori performers. One is the singer and one is Gosu, who is the drummer. And pansori is performed in this configuration that you have this audience around it. There's not actually the elevated stage, and it's just happening in the middle of where the people are gathering. And as you see that the performers and the spectators, they are all in white costumes. It doesn't seem like costumes. They are just wearing their daily lives clothes. So there were no barriers in between like performing costumes or their daily life clothes. So they were performing and living, all those are interwoven. And as you see that, some people were just walking by and gathering themselves and eating, watching the performances. To add some more context of pansori performance, pansori is called folk Korean opera, but it does have some elements in opera. That we had this brief conversation. It was really interesting that comparing Korean pansori and opera, it has those parts, those elements, singing and the narrative, delivering the story, and the performing parts, all those three. But in pansori, one performer performs everything, taking all those different roles and characters from one body. This one body is the narrator and singer and dancer, with the one accompanist, the gosu, group player. So that's the significant difference we can see from the Western stage opera.
Yes, and I mean, when I was living in Korea, I fell in love with pansori. I think it's
Mhm.
fascinating. The sound of the voice is so interesting.
Mhm.
But also that comparison to Western opera always sort of confused me,
Mhm.
because even in the earliest forms of Western opera with like Monteverdi or even before that, there's typically more singers and the voice and a larger orchestra, so they come together in that way. I think also one of the things to note for the viewers who are unfamiliar with pansori is that it can be quite long. It can be up to like 8 hours long. It's a very long. One of the other unique things about it is it has sort of a call and response aspect to it. So the singer will interact with the audience in interesting ways. Whenever I would go to a performance, I was always the only Westerner there, and usually the youngest person. And people would be like, or even in the taxi cab, I'd be like, "Is there a pansori station?" And the cab driver would be like, "What? You want pansori?" And I was like, "Yes, please."
Yeah, there's also like the narratives and the stories are all from folk tales. So those are all like passed on through their mouth. There are some musical lyric texts still we have, but most of them we could also, the pansori trainers were passed by their masters by, so all those musical notes and tunes and rhythms and all those are passed by their vocal training. And that's another significant part. And another part is that it's performed outside. It's not in the stage. So there's no microphone speaker system there. So they had to fight for the outside ambience. So Melody, who's going to demonstrate pansori, had also the experience of training herself outside near to the waterfall so that they can, with the volume, with those intensity, they have to beat the sound of the waterfall or the biggest sound from the nature. So those are really famous anecdotes of their training. So they have to build up their body, whole body muscles to generate those big volume of sound.
Yeah, my students are always surprised when when I present an opera in class and tell them that they're not microphoned because they're like, no, they have to fill the Met stage. So, okay, so let's move on to, okay, so dancing as communal gathering and play.
Yes, I'm gonna show two videos and pictures. One is Gangangsule. Gangangsule is one of the most well-known Korean folk dance that consists of singing, dancing, and playing games as a communal activity. If we see this video.
Sure.
And these days, there are so many Gangangsule performances are performed on the stage. This is outside. These are all the villagers, not the professional dancers. And this is from 1966. And as you see and hear, the performers are singing and dancing at the same time. And it can go longer than the overnight because the origin of this dance is to dance under the full moon, which is the 15th date of the 8th month in the lunar calendar. So it's a community ritual that, as you see, that only the women can dance. But this is one of the rare chance that they can sing and dance and play publicly in that patriarchal society. So they are allowed to sing and dance and play outside under the full moon.
That's so interesting. I mean, even in dress, in traditional Korean society, women had to go out if they were sequestered at home, but if they went outside, they had to cover their heads and their faces with different garments so that they weren't seen in this way. This is a beautiful example of the circle dance. It's really lovely.
Yeah, what I mean by it's a community ritual that there are so many different theories of the origin of Gangangsule, and in the village, they gather together under the full moon, celebrating or praying for their greatest harvest coming from the farming culture. So it's not only for women, for all of the villagers. It's a big village gathering
Yes.
of the year.
And
So
here, tell me about this.
this is the exact section from Gangangsule in this hanbok. Now, I was going to edit this part, but I didn't because I wanted to show how hard to adjust your costume, your clothes in squat position. And in this squat position, I try to sing. So what I'm doing is to sing the part that you're now rolling up your sleeves and catching something, catching the big frogs. To do that, you need to roll up your sleeves first, and also you need to dig in the basket. So all those moves, adjusting your skirt and digging down and rolling up your sleeves, that all came from the farming culture, and they're working and dancing those incorporated lifestyle. That was from Gangangsule. You could see that from those old footage. Also, you can see that from this new modernized form. And also you can see those moves in the contemporary work that I work with dance department students as well.
And so then also talk about this dance.
This is 농악, which is farmer's dance. This is another example of the folk communal dance that incorporates dancing and singing and playing the instruments. So this is significant because it's literally called farmer's dance. The farmers back then worked all day long in the field, so they needed something to energize themselves. So they started playing the drums. As you see, all those different sizes of drums, and they cheered themselves up. So the singing and dancing was pretty functional back then.
So here they start in a traditional circle dance, yes.
Yes. So many forms are circle because back then those outside performances were happened in this open field, open ground, having the spectators, audience surrounded. So there was no clear front or back. It's not a proscenium stage. So having this group of people in a circle and keep traveling in that spacious area is common. You can see from all those communal folk dances. And here we see all those different sizes of drums. And you see this double-sided drum 장구. Those are the most famous, well-known and widely used drum in Korean music and dance. And these small drums are 소고, the smallest one. And you see 푹.
So can you talk about their costumes in this? Because I've always been fascinated by the headdresses.
Yes, the headdresses. So they are wearing different type of hats. Those are not just hats, as you see that you see those attached strings, the ribbons. Those are called 상모. And now it's a great timing that Togo players are playing their part. It's really sectional that it's your turn to show your skills. So this Togo group is showing great technique of squatting and jumping as they roll around their 상모 ribbon.
It was so amazing the first time I saw this, and we've actually had a Samunori group on campus that performed this, and just watching this skill of the ribbon work as well as the pom-pom, the popo up at the top was just amazing.
Yeah, this is just like manipulating your body parts separately like this. To do that, you need to train yourself years and years separately with those instrumental parts and your step patterns and your head. So all those different parts should play the different rhythmic patterns. since Korean music has polyrhythmic structure that we also talked about, it's pretty interesting. Within one rhythm, it has different patterns of rhythm. So the body parts are manifesting those different ways of interpreting the rhythm.
Yes, one of the things from some of my friends in Korea that who are musicians have said that it's often really challenging for Westerners to get the polyrhythmic down because there's an extra beat
Mm-hmm.
of that way. So, but it's really fascinating to see the circle dance carry through in this way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, when I went back to Korea after my first year there to do research in Dure, and was introduced to this concept of white clothes, I was really sort of surprised by it, because it's not unusual for cultures to be associated with colors like Ireland with green or China with red. But what was really surprising to me was that the Korean culture actually adopted this color and wore it every day, or that idea that people wore white clothes. I mean, no one in Ireland is wearing green every day of their life, or
Mm-hmm.
in China they're not wearing red every day of their life. So as I started to research this more and think about that, I asked colleagues and scholars and dress historians about like why white clothes. And interestingly, a lot of times I said I was researching farmer clothes, and they would be like, why? It's just an old white thing. And I would ask them why, and they said, well, they were either too poor for colored fabric, or religious reasons, or laws forbid it, or all of these different things. And none of these really made any sense to me. It was like,
Mm-hmm.
why, like none of these things seem to really be the reason. So
Mm-hmm.
my research started to take on that kind of work. And I'll talk a little bit about that. And one of the things that really surprised me, so growing up in South Dakota on a farm,
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't imagine going out into the field. And this here is a picture of a rice paddy that I took on my field research trip in South Korea, of like going out into the field in white clothes, because my God, the laundry alone, how would you keep it clean? It's like, this is muddy and gunky and dirty. And like, what would you do? Why wouldn't you just wear something gray or black or brown? But so these are just confusing things to me. So as I started to think about this and do research, and one of the first questions that came up was the idea of poverty or having money. And in fact, that's really not even a thing, because currency wasn't really um, part of Korean culture until very late in the 19th century, especially amongst the common people. Most of the time it was through bartering. And so even into the 20th century. So these two images, one of them comes from 15 Years Among the Top Knots, which is the great market at Chinju. And again, we see all of these hundreds of people in white clothes in this black and white photograph. And then at the Agricultural Museum, our new favorite place, this exhibition hall is this fabric salesperson who, again, dressed all in white, is bartering for or trading textiles, and they're in different colors and in different ways. And so I just couldn't quite wrap my head around it. And I'll show you a little clip from the Agricultural Museum. So this is the outside. It's this really sweet museum, and it's free. So anybody who's going to Seoul should go. But once you get in, there are these great exhibitions about tools and, again, dioramas, the amazing dioramas, life size and small, of cultural aspects of agrarian life. And so here you see the guy, plowing over there. I'm going to skip forward a little bit as I move through to For example, this very large diorama of agrarian life, and everyone is in white clothes in this way. And there's another one that I'm going to skip over to here. Again, these very large scenes of dure and communal working and agrarian life. But however, here we have a few people in colored clothes, which is sort of like, okay, interesting.
Okay.
So this museum was really a very interesting and rich treasure of ideas to help me think about this. And of the other questions, or the other reasons given about sumptuary laws. So within the color theory of Korean culture, yellow is the center of the color wheel because of the emperor. That's the sun and gold, and that sits there. Whereas white is further out of that and is one of the directional colors. And again, even within yin and yang, white is the masculine side, the solid side. And so as we go back and start looking at the sumptuary laws that were passed, even back to the Goryeo period, white is actually forbidden. So people must have had color somewhere or some access to color, because they're prohibiting people from wearing white garments. Now, it's also important to note that in Korean culture, white is, or I should say, raw, uncolored, not necessarily white, but is reserved also for funereal situations, as you know.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
because you're returning to sort of a natural state. Also in shamanistic history, white is very important because of its sense of purity, its sense of cleanliness, and even to purify the soul, white paper is burned. So this ritual costume from the 20th century is in the National Folk Museum of Korea. And then this Confucian scholar, Kim Jang-sung, this image, again in white robes, is at the Harvard Sackler Museum. So then I started to think about, like, okay, when you're weaving these things, what is this like? What is actually the color of this textile as it comes off the loom? And so at the Andong Folk Museum, here we see a woman who is weaving mochi, which is rami in English. Rami is a cousin to linen, or they're both flax, or they're both sort of bast fibers, akin to flax. And so here she is using a backstrap loom to weave the textile, and she's in a light colored green skirt. And then in this artistic depiction of two women preparing, so this object here is the roll of warp threads, which is this here at the back of the loom. And so both of them, neither of them are in white clothes at all. They're both wearing colorful garments, out working to prep this very labor intensive task. Making cloth is incredibly labor intensive. And this great video, which I'm going to share about how textiles are woven, which I share sometimes. So I'm going to skip forward a little bit to here, where this is actually the woman who is stripping the internal fibrous material from the plant, and taking those out with this little knife. And then those get hung out to dry and to stay in the sun for several days until they become much more pliable and sturdy to work with. They then get soaked so they become pliable again. And here they start to strip them into thinner thread using their teeth. And so it's a really interesting process. I'm fascinated by how much the body is used to create this textile, from your mouth, your
your
hand,
lip.
your legs, your lips, and then as they here, she's going to splice them together, because they're not very long fibers, unlike silk, which can be really long fibers or
Mm-hmm.
one continuous. She's blending them together
Mm-hmm.
with some hanging out of her mouth even, which is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And then she, rubs it on her leg in order to
Mm-hmm.
create this. So this could be like,
Perfect curve that she has. So all those body surfaces and parts are pretty functional
yes,
in use.
exactly. We should do a weaving dance together.
Exactly.
And so here they are, preparing them and putting them together, the thinner ones together to make a stronger
Mm-hmm.
thread. I'm just going to skip through some of this quickly. And so it's almost a dance itself, creating this just to create the threads on the loom.
Exactly. It requires a choreography with the right angle, right timing, and right choreography in time and space.
I remember, I'm going to pause here, this moment where in working with you on the piece, you have this gesture in the dance where you called it fishing nets, where
Fishing
they're
net.
rolling something up,
Uh-huh.
and here they're like rolling this up, which is this exactly that gesture, which when I rewatched this video to show them to I was like, oh my gosh, it's fishing nets, but it's thread and yarn instead.
There's many things to roll in and roll up in the back then with those words.
Yes. So now what happens is it gets starched, so it becomes a little bit stronger and easier to weave. And they roll it all up again. And we're going to skip to them putting it on the loom. So here they are weaving this and putting it together again in a backstrap loom. And here is all of that together at the back. Slowly. Okay, and here, this image just amazes me. So we're talking about bast fibers like straw or flax or linen or things of that nature. And here we see very similar plants or very similar things used as footwear, as a straw thing, as the rope that helps control the loom. As now they're not all the same one, but now as a fiber that's being turned into a cloth to be worn, and finally, amazingly, as a thatched roof. So all of these things together, like out of these natural resources, even as like
Energy source.
as an energy source to like heat their homes and to and to help them cook and make food. So it's just this really fascinating way in which um, uh, this one thing can be turned into any number of things. So I started to go back to the idea of the color of the loom. And here we have rami and hemp and cotton, three very early textiles in Korean history. And none of them are purely white. They are all shades of tan, really. And so then I want to talk a little bit about dye and where dyeing comes from. So dyeing in Korean culture and the Korean peninsula goes all the way back to, the 3 states period, to 3 to 700 BCE, and come out of any number of plants, like globally. So plants, spices, herbs, earth, food, animals, but really most importantly of them is indigo. Indigo, which dates back in Korea to the Three Kingdoms period, and is a very interesting process of again using a plant which is green to create this really interesting rich blue dye. On this field research, I also went to Jeju-do, and this was very interesting to learn about galot, or working clothes, in which persimmons, unripe persimmons, are crushed and the clothes are then dyed in that. And in the same process, they become water resistant. So they turn this sort of ruddy orange color up here, or as she's wearing. And they leave them out in the sun to sort of get bleached or baked in as this color happens. And then another aspect that I found very interesting here, we have indigo dyeing, a sort of genre painting from the National Folk Museum, again, of two women, both in colored garments. And it talks about using natural pigments from plants and weaving cloth as normal. And lastly, sort of the opposite of dyeing is bleaching. And so again, here we have the reverse of it. So if you don't want color, how do you get rid of it? You sun bleach it. This is very akin to a Japanese tradition of snow bleaching. So along the river, obviously women doing women's work are washing the laundry and laying it out to dry. But at the same time, the sun is bleaching the color out and turning it a much cleaner, purer white. These postcards all come from the William H. Hannon Library at LMU, which has one of the world's largest postcard collections.
I just want to add the squatting positions of all the women that I demonstrated, that in Korean dance, there are so many parts that we need to do the same moves with arms, with the ground in squat. So I saw those squatting positions a lot from my grandmother, because back then in the kitchen, I still remember my grandma's kitchen, that there's no chairs, no elevated sinks. So they only worked on the ground, cutting all the vegetables and making the fire and mixing up on the ground. Everything's on the ground level, so that Korean women had to learn the being in that squatting position for a while, hours and hours, with those heavy skirts. So that has been my investigation as well, that in Korean dance, in their daily lives, with those costumes, with their lifestyles, all those interwoven revealing in traditional and contemporary Korean dance as well.
Absolutely. And when I lived in Korea, I noticed that amongst the women. I mean, I was told by the Korean woman who ran the Fulbright organization in Korea that I was the first person to come and investigate hanbok when I applied. And she was confused a little bit, because she was like, what is this American man going to do with Korean hanbok? Because of the gendered nature of this. And it was, she's like, so we have, like, no one's ever wanted to do this. And so it was really fascinating and I existed in this sort of liminal space between men and women.
Yes.
So many people were surprised that me as a man was exploring these ideas around dress and sewing and creation, all this stuff that's women's work.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I would sometimes hand sew. I would have homework. So my hanbok Samsengnim would give me, her name is Kim In-ja. She would give me homework, and I would like hand sew on the subway on my way to class sometimes, finish my homework, or wherever I was. And the Korean women would see it and giggle and like be like, no, you didn't do that well enough. And the Korean men had no idea what to do with me. They were just like, you're sewing? I don't understand. And I loved it. It became this kind of performance art in a way of just simply
yes,
sewing on
exactly. That just tells it that we still have the residue of the gendered society from back then. So we can see this from Korean dance repertoire, that it's really gendered, that there are male dances and female dances in costumes as well. So there are separate pieces for male dancers and female dancers. Even in one dance, their movement vocabulary is different. According to their costumes as well, the women are wearing skirts, manipulating their skirt is one of the crucial movement vocabulary. And for the guys, they have to deal with their topo and durumagi, so those long jackets. So costumes and movements and all those were coming from those gendered society.
No, I recognize that as well because when I would watch traditional dance at, the Kugak Theater, like watching the male performers with their dopo or their durumagi, as they would like leap in the air and like move their robes in this way. And the women were always sort of grounded. They were always on the ground moving. And the men were like running and jumping and doing like
masculine movements.
Yes, exactly. It was really fascinating.
But these days, in contemporary type of Korean dance, those barriers are blurred a lot. But still, there are some more works. But in contemporary forms, and that barriers are like interacting a lot these days.
Oh, interesting. Oh, that's fascinating. So kind of wrapping up this idea of white clothes, really the idea of Baekminjok, pardon me, um, solidifies and codifies itself during the Japanese colonization period, of which the United States was kind of, well, not kind of, but implicated in because they really didn't do much. The United States at that time was part of this conversation, but allowed Japan just to sort of come in. And throughout that time period, the Japanese really tried to abolish Korean culture in many different ways, obliterate it. Language, architecture, clothing. They forced men to cut their top knots, their hair off, in so many different ways through assimilation policies, known as the Chosun Chongdokbu. But what was interesting is that Koreans turned to white clothes and used this as a visual form of resistance and protest, adopting white clothes as a way to identify Koreans to each other and to sort of identify themselves as the group. One of the things that also struck me within the language of Korean culture is the phrase "uri hana," in which means we are one. So it's a way in which visually to signify to other Koreans that you are part of our group. And that was another fascinating element of the ideas of white dress in this. And so then by the time the end of the Korean War happens, this resistance and these protests lead way or give way to the ideas of modernization, in which hanbok is considered uncomfortable and declines in favor of Western clothes, which are modern and more comfortable. And I argue that this is actually a different form of colonization because the United States still has a very large military presence in South Korea. And only recently have moved the base, not totally yet, I understand, but has moved the base outside of the heart of Seoul. There's was and still remains a very large military base in Itaewon.
Yes.
But it's also interesting that there's kind of this revival or this reinterpretation of hanbok happening right now, in which it's not viewed as being uncomfortable, and it's not fusion hanbok, and it's not some sort of crazy interpretation. It's actually comfortable, wearable hanbok, and which things are not suppressed, like the bust of women is not cinched down.
So the hanbok can be also comfortable costumes that for women. So there's no restriction in the downside part, that you can have so much room in your tokbaji. So for the women's hanbok, you have layers of skirts and you have tokbaji in it, but tokbaji itself has some rooms in it. So in some ways, when I am wearing hanbok, I feel more comfortable in this downside department, because with the Western pants, there are some tightness and restrictions of leg moves. But in hanbok, with that big rooms of tokbaji, your legs can breathe.
Exactly. So talk about Korean dance and costumes after modernization.
Yes, it was interesting to learn about the dying history of the folk people. So I want to talk about the colors. The significant visual difference of modern Korean dance is its costume colors. Around from 1920s to 1950s, overlapping with Japanese colonial era with Korean modernization in arts, as well as in other social sectors. Korean dance, not only with Korean folk dances we've been talking about, but also with court dance and ritual dance. All those were transformed and stylized as a stage art form. So with that, white clothes we just saw from those paintings from the old era. They're all wore white clothes when they are performing. Those were replaced with stage costumes of ornated colors and materials. Since then, they have developed further until these days along with Korean dance repertoires. So as the repertoire evolves and big scaled stage performances are now performed. So around this time, I would like to introduce the modern version of two dances we discussed, 강강술래 and 장구 dance from 농악, the farmer's dance. So let's watch modern circle dance first. Same singing tune, but there are separate singers and dancers and instrumental players. Back then, 가무악 일체, which means singing, dancing, and playing instruments, all come from one body. That's the concept of Korean performance art back then. But it's specialized and divided this time that I was majoring in only dance, so that I cannot sing like melodies, a concert singer. But back then, 강강술래 performers had to do with singing and dancing all those parts at the same time. But this is a stage form that modernized from the original villagers performance we watched. As you see that you see those colorful skirts, it's staged and structured red and blue, red and blue, red and blue. There is the choreography involved it. You can also see the moon, the bigger size
Fake moon.
of the fake moon. And you see the blue fake light. That's not the moonlight. So this
Is their hair wig? Is their hair a wig, or is it
exactly? So they do have the wig hair, so that there are so many great skills to attach the wig, braid it down, or wig with this 양반, what 양반 wore back then. And as you see that they do have those elements from the vocabulary, the step patterns, skipping and walking, but it's much more precise and much
the
more
skirts
synced.
are so light? They're just like organza.
Exactly. Yeah, the fabric is much lighter as the dance costume, just like other dance costumes that has to reveal the body shape of the dancers. As you see that the dancers have pretty structured, similar body size, even with the facial structure as well, to be the dancer of those regimented form of dances. So that's one of the qualifications to be a dancer of those dance companies.
And this is what you demonstrated earlier.
Exactly. This is the squatting, catching the frog gestural part that they are clapping from the ground and rolling a sleeve and catch the frog.
I love that they're catching a frog.
And they are doing some sort of fishing net.
Oh,
There,
yes, exactly.
I don't know what they're rolling in. I would call it fishing net, but there are so many things rolling back then.
Oh, yeah. That's amazing. Okay. And then, so the modern Tanguchum.
Yes, this is Changguchum, and you saw the same drum from Dongak Farmers Dance performance. And Changguchum is one of the well-known repertoire of female unison dances. And this is performed in a group form or the solo form. The left one is me in a solo Jangu dance, and right side is in me in a group Jangu dance. And both are having these colorful, flamboyant costumes in it. I have performed Sanguchum in different shiny, sparkly, gorgeous, very colored stage costumes following that evolution of Korean dance modernization, but not in white costumes. But this time, I did for the first time in my life with an attempt to revive the folk narrative investigated in Leon's research, 백이민족, through one of the dynamic modern folk performance, as you see, lots of jumps and exciting rhythmic pattern. Um, so when I was performing Changguchum with Leon's costume in on LMU campus, it felt so different from me that I realized that this attire shifts the manner and mood and all those detailed style of my dance movements from the those presentational um, set of mood as you see from these pictures as a performance with the audience to self-evoked emotion that I experienced at LMU when I was filming my solo tango dance in Leon's white costume. That it was almost a ritual, and it was not for the audience. We didn't intend to it, but with this pandemic, I had to dance by myself without any audience members. But in this white costume, it felt like it's meditative, and all those excitement was coming from inside of me, just like the folk people, the Korean ancestors had to do in their hard lives with all those labors in farming, with all the huge number of house members. So it was really great experience dancing Changuchum without the audience in white clothes.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. I love that. Um, so from there, let's talk about your costume a little bit. So when we started to collaborate on this, we shared a lot of different ideas, and we looked at even things like fusion hanbok, and we finally came back to this idea of the traditional and going back to the early as we could. And I was very inspired by the Haenyeon, excuse me, of Jeju, and the Choguri of theirs. So it's a little bit different. And for those who are watching, the Haenyeon are known as the mermaids of Jeju. They were the economic drivers of the community. They were fisherwomen who would dive into the ocean and harvest fresh fish and mollusks and whatnot and seaweed and sell it right, and you would eat it right there at the shore, or they would take it home. So if you're ever in Jeju-do, you must go to the seaside and have the fresh, like, sea cucumbers and whatever it is that they have harvested from the sea with fresh seaweed and gochujang and soju right there. It's so good.
Those are
It's
the
so
good
amazing.
ingredients.
Pardon me?
Those are the good combination that you should have them all together.
It's true. It's really excellent. And so I was inspired by that. And then I wanted to actually sort of take us back a little bit in time. And I became inspired by this chima, probably a yangbang, um, from a Yangbang tomb of the 16th century, in which the chima, which is still structured exactly the same way, made the same way, but with these gathers at the where the front of the skirt is brought up to create this sort of interesting pleat and a slight train. And so this became the inspiration plus white for DaEun's costume. And so, Don, do you want to talk to us about the introduction to the performance that we will see tomorrow? So tomorrow night, after this lecture demonstration, the dance program at LMU drops their fall concert.
Sure. The two performances that will be shared today, right after this, and one more my solo at the dance concert tomorrow, have their cultural roots from Korean ancestors for folk lives. Just we have been through. Pansori is a folk storytelling musical solo performance played outside on a street, yard, or open ground among those civilians, low-class citizens, which is called Seomin, both, and also the forms of 장구춤 and 장구 play, two 장구 performances. We're going to see one 안진반 sitting performed by Im Gyu-shin, 장구 player today, and another one 선반 standing dancing form of 장구 performance, which my solo dance is inspired. Both are originated from 농악, the farmer's dance, and 장구 is just we talked about is one of the famous, well-known drum in Korean folk or court music and dance. So you're gonna watch the sitting form right after this from In Gyu-shin, and the dancing form tomorrow at the student concert. And the pansori you're gonna listen to today is called 토끼 화상. Melody Shin will be performing the pansori part from 토끼 화상 that depicts the interesting scene of drawing a rabbit's portrait from a folktale 수군가. The segment parts and the vocabulary of the song are also used for the soundtrack of Kunmu, the student work, the contemporary choreography that I have worked through the whole semester with amazing dance students, along with Ingyu's 장구 play looped upon electronic measures. So those are the continuation of the investigation from the traditional original source we're introducing today, and you're going to see how those are contemporized in this contemporary work tomorrow as well.
Excellent, thank you. So if you haven't reserved your tickets yet, please do so and come back and see Together and Apart, the LMU dance program's fall concert. And with that, we would like to thank the Korea Foundation for their generous support, the Fulbright Association, USITT's Grant and Fellowships Committee, Culture Hub Los Angeles, especially Scarlett Kim and Julian Stein, Kim Min Jung, my student assistant and photographer on the field research trip in South Korea, all four of my RAINS research assistants here at LMU, the generous support that I've received from LMU through the Department of Theater and Dance, Bryant Keith Alexander, the Dean of Communication and Fine Arts, and the Center for Asian Business, and Dr. Peg. Thank you all so much for paying attention and listening to us today. Please enjoy the performances that follow our lecture dem within this same program, and stay safe. And thank you, Jung DaEun, for this wonderful conversation. It's been so delightful to collaborate with you, and we need to make a weaving piece next.
Exactly, soon. Thank you for having me, and see you tomorrow at 5.
Yes, indeed.
Concert.
Awesome. All right. Thank you all so much. Have a good night.
Have a good night.
용왕이 보시고 참 충신있다. 충여라 주부지 충이로다. 네 말은 그리허나 우리 수국 충신이 세상 사람의 고깃밥이 된다 허니 그 아니 원통하뇨. 별주부 여짜오되 소시는 사족이 구비하여 강상에 높이떠 망보기를 자라와 인간의 봉패는 없사오나 해중지 소생으로 토끼 얼굴을 물으니 화상 하나 그려주사이다. 글랑그리 허여라 화사를 불러라. 화공을 불러들여 토끼 화상을 그린다. 공정유리 청홍녀 금색 추파 거북연저 오징어 얼음어 깔어 강동아 피를 덕덕 불어 단청 채색을 두루 붙여서 이리저리 그린다. 천하 명산승지간 평계보다 눈 그리고 두견행 무지지 울제 소리 듣던 귀 그리고 난초 지초 웬가량초 꽃 따먹던 입 그리고 동네 방장 운무중어 내 잘 맞던 코 그리고 대안음 동서랑풍 펑풍하던 털 그리고 만화방장 화림중 펄펄 뛰던 팔 그리고 두기 난쪽 끝눈은 도리도리 허리는 신꽁댕이며 또 좌표는 정상이요